immediately. I was quite angry, but my husband was so miserable that I said nothing. I saw little of him during the next few weeks. He had most of his meals in the laboratory. Then one evening he came home smiling, and I knew that his troubles were over. "I've got everything perfect at last," he said, "and I want you to be the first to see it happen." "Wonderful, Andre," I said. "I'll be delighted." We had a special dinner to celebrate, and at the end of the meal, when the servant brought in the bottle of champagne, Andre took it from her. "We'll celebrate with reintegrated champagne," he said, landing the way down to the laboratory. I held the champagne and glasses while he unlocked the door and switched on the lights. He then opened the door of a telephone booth he had bought, and which he had made into his transmitter. He put a chair inside the booth, then said, "Put the bottle down on that." Having carefully closed the door, he took me to the other end of the room and gave me a pair of very dark sunglasses. He put on another pair and walked back to the booth. "Don't take your glasses off until I tell you," he said. Then he pushed a switch and the whole room was brightly lit by an orange flash of light. I saw a ball of fire inside the transmitter and felt its heat on my face and hands. The whole thing lasted less than a second. "Now you can take off your glasses, Helene," Andre said. He opened the door of the booth, and I was amazed to see that the bottle of champagne and the chair were not there. Andre then took me into the next room. There was a second telephone booth in the corner. Opening the door, he lifted the bottle of champagne off the chair. "Are you sure it's not dangerous to drink?" I asked as he opened the bottle. "Absolutely sure, Helene," he said, giving me a glass. "Drink this and I'll show you something much more amazing." We went back into the other room. "Oh, Andre," I said, "remember poor Dandolo. This is only a guinea pig, Helene, but I'm certain it will go through all right." He put the little animal on the floor of the booth and quickly closed the door. I put on my dark glasses again and saw and felt the ball of fire. Without waiting for Andre, I rushed into the next room and looked into the receiving booth. "Oh, Andre, he's there!" I shouted. "You've succeeded." "I hope so," he said. "If this little animal is still alive and well in a month, we can then consider the experiment a success." That month of waiting seemed like a year. And then one day, Andre put Miquette, our dog, into his transmitter. He did not tell me first, knowing very well that I would never have agreed to such an experiment with our dog. When he did tell me, Miquette had been successfully transmitted 5 or 6 times. "She seemed to enjoy the experience," Andre said. I now expected that my husband would invite the Air Ministry people to come down, but he went on working. "There are some parts I do not yet fully understand myself," he said. "I must be able to explain how and why it works." Of course, I never thought that he would try an experiment with a human being, not then anyway. It was only after the accident that I discovered he had put a second set of the control switches inside the disintegration booth, so that he could use himself as the object of the experiment. The morning Andre tried this terrible experiment, he did not come home for lunch. I sent the servant down with some food, but she brought it back with a note she had found outside the laboratory door. "Do not disturb me. I am working." It was just a little later when Henri came running into the room to say that he had caught a funny fly. Refusing even to look at his closed hand, I ordered him to release it immediately. But it has such a funny white head, he said. I took him to the open window and ordered him to release the fly. I knew that Henri had caught the fly because it looked different from other flies, but I also knew that his father hated cruelty to animals and that there would be a fuss if he discovered our son had put a fly in a box or bottle. At dinner time that evening, I had still not seen Andre, so I ran down to the laboratory and knocked at the door. He did not answer, but I heard him moving around. A moment later, he pushed a note under the door. It was typewritten. Helene, I am having trouble. Put the boy to bed and come back in an hour's time. I went back to the house and put Henri to bed. Then I returned to the laboratory where I found another note pushed under the door. My hand shook as I picked it up because I knew by then that something must be terribly wrong. I read, Helene, first of all, I rely on you to be brave because you alone can help me. I have had a serious accident. It is useless talking to me because I cannot answer. I cannot speak. Please do exactly what I ask. Knock 3 times on the door to show that you understand, and then fetch me a bowl of milk with some brandy in it. Shaking with fear, I did as he asked, and in less than 5 minutes I was back. There was another note under the door. Helene, when you knock, I'll open the door. Walk over to my desk and put down the bowl of milk. Then go into the other room where the receiving booth is. Look carefully and try to find a fly which ought to be there, but which I am unable to find. Unfortunately, I cannot see small things very easily. Promise not to look at me or talk to me. I cannot answer you. Knock again 3 times and I will know I have your promise. My life depends on the help you give me. I had to calm myself before I knocked slowly 3 times. I heard Andre moving behind the door, then it opened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that he was standing behind the door. Without looking round, I carried the bowl of milk to his desk. My dear, you can rely on me, I said gently. I put the bowl on his desk, then walked into the next room where all the lights were on. There were papers everywhere, chairs lay on their sides, and one of the window curtains was half torn and hanging down. And in the fireplace there was a heap of burned documents. I knew I would not find the fly Andre wanted me to look for. Women know things that can't be explained by reason. This kind of knowledge is rarely understood by men. I already knew that the fly Andre wanted was the one which Henri had caught and which I made him release. I heard Andre moving in the next room, and then a strange sucking noise, as though he had trouble drinking his milk. Andre, there is no fly here, I said, trying to speak calmly. Can you help me? Knock once for yes, twice for no. He knocked twice for no. May I come to you? I said. I don't know what has happened, my love, but I promise to be brave. After a moment of hesitation, he knocked once on his desk. I stopped at the door, horrified. Andre had his head and shoulders covered by the brown velvet cloth from the table. Andre, we'll make a thorough search tomorrow, I said. Why don't you go to bed? I'll take you to the guest room. I won't let anybody see you. His left hand knocked the desk twice. Do you need a doctor, Andre? I asked. No. He knocked quickly. I did not know what to do or say. And then I said, Henri caught a fly this morning, but I made him release it. He said its head was white. Could it be the one you're looking for? Andre let out a strange sigh and let his right arm drop. Instead of his hand, a gray stick like the branch of a tree hung out of his sleeve, almost down to his knee. I had to bite my fingers to stop myself screaming. Andre, my love, tell me what happened. Andre. Oh, it's terrible. He knocked once for yes, then pointed to the door. I went out and sank down to the floor, crying as he locked the door behind me. He started typing again, and I waited. At last he came to the door and pushed a note under it. Helene, come back in the morning. I must think, and by then I will have typed out an explanation for you. Take one of my sleeping pills and go to bed. I need you fresh and strong tomorrow, my poor love. Because of the sleeping pill, I slept heavily, without dreaming. I woke suddenly at 7 a.m., ran down to the kitchen and prepared coffee, bread, and butter. Andre opened the laboratory door as soon as I knocked, and I took in the food. His head was still covered, and on his desk lay a typewritten sheet of paper, which I picked up. Andre pointed to the other door, and I walked into the next room. He shut the door after me, and I heard him pouring out coffee as I read. You remember the ashtray experiment? I have had a similar accident. I transmitted myself successfully the night before last. During a second experiment yesterday, a fly must have got into the disintegrator. My only hope is to find that fly and take it through with me again. Please search for it carefully. If it is not found, I shall have to find a way to put an end to all this. I cried softly, imagining some horrible rearrangement of Andre's face. Perhaps his eyes where his ears should be, or his mouth at the back of his neck. Or worse, Andre must be saved. The fly must be found. Andre, may I come in? I said. He opened the door. Andre, don't despair. I'm going to find that fly. It can't be far away. But there must be no talk of putting an end to all this. If you don't wish to be seen, I'll make you a mask until you get well again. If you cannot work, I'll call Professor Augier, and he and all your other friends will save you. Now, can't you let me see your face, Andre? I won't be afraid. But he knocked a no on his desk and pointed to the door. I will never forget that day-long hunt for a fly. I made all the servants join in the search. I told them a fly had escaped from the professor's laboratory and that it must be caught alive. It was clear they thought I was crazy. They said so to the police later, and that hunt for a fly probably saved me from the guillotine. I questioned Henri and frightened the poor boy by my wild, fierce manner, but then I kissed him and made him understand what I wanted. Yes, he remembered. He had found the fly by the kitchen window but had released it immediately as ordered. I examined all the many flies we caught that day, but none had anything like a white head. That night, as I began to take Andre's dinner down to him, I stopped by the telephone. I had no doubt that Andre would kill himself unless I could make him change his mind. He would never forgive me for breaking a promise, but I phoned Professor Augier. The professor is away until the end of the week, a polite voice at the other end informed me. So I would have to fight alone, but I would save Andre. I took the food down to the laboratory and, after he let me in, put it on his desk. Then I went into the next room. I want to know exactly what happened, I said as he closed the door after me. Please tell me, Andre. He typed an answer and pushed it under the door. Helene, I do not want to tell you. Since I must leave you, I would rather you remembered me as I was before. I must destroy myself in such a way that nobody can possibly know what has happened to me. I have thought of a way which is neither simple nor easy, but you can and will help me. But why don't you tell the other professors about your discovery? I said. They will help you and save you, Andre. Several furious knocks shook the door, and I knew then that he would never accept this solution. I talked to him for hours about me, about our boy, about his family, but he did not reply. At last I cried, Andre, do you hear me? Yes, he knocked very gently. Listen, I have another idea. You remember the ashtray? Perhaps if you had put it through again, it might have come out with the letters turned back the right way. He was typing before I finished speaking. I have already thought of that. It is why I wanted the fly. It must go through with me. There is no hope otherwise. Please try, Andre. I said. I have tried 7 times already, but to please you, I will try again. If you cannot find the dark glasses, turn away from the machine and put your hands over your eyes. I'm ready, Andre, I shouted, turning and covering my eyes. After what seemed a very long wait, but was probably only a minute or two, I saw a bright light through my fingers. I turned round as the booth door opened. His head and shoulders still covered with the velvet cloth, Andre stepped carefully out of the booth. Do you feel any different? I asked, touching his arm. He moved away quickly and fell over one of the chairs. As he fell, the velvet cloth slowly dropped off his head and shoulders. The horror was too much for me. I screamed again and again, but could not stop looking at him. And yet I knew that if I looked at the horror for much longer, I would go on screaming for the rest of my life. Slowly, the monster, the thing that had been my husband, covered its head, got up, and found its way into the other room. I hope there is no life after death, because if there is, I shall never forget the horror. Day and night, awake or asleep, I see it, and I know that I will see it forever. Nothing can ever make me forget that dreadful white hairy head with its 2 pointed ears, pink and wet. The nose was also that of a cat, a huge cat. But the eyes, where the eyes should have been, there were 2 brown shapes the size of saucers. Instead of a mouth, there was a long, hairy vertical cut. From this hung something long and black and wet at the end. I must have fainted because I found myself on the floor of the laboratory, staring at the closed door. Behind it, I could hear the noise of Andre's typewriter. Then the noise stopped, and a sheet of paper came under the door. Trembling with fear and disgust, I crawled over to where I could read it without touching it. Now you understand. The last experiment was a new disaster, my poor Helene. I suppose you recognized part of Dandelo's head. When I went into the disintegrator, my head was only that of a fly. Now only the eyes and mouth remain. The rest is part of a cat's head. You can see that there is only one solution. I must disappear. Knock on the door when you are ready, and I will explain what you have to do. Getting up, I went to the door and tried to speak. No sound came out of my throat, so I knocked once. You can, of course, guess the rest. He explained his plan in short typewritten notes, and I agreed to everything. I followed him into the silent factory. In my hand was a page of explanations. What I had to know about the steam hammer. He pointed to the control switch as he went past, and I watched him stop in front of that terrible instrument. I watched him kneel down, wrap a cloth round his head, and lie down flat on the floor. It was not difficult. I was not killing my husband. Andre, poor Andre, had gone long ago, it seemed. Without hesitating, I pushed the switch. The great metal hammer seemed to drop slowly. My husband. The thing's body shook for a second and then lay still. It was then I noticed that he had forgotten to put his right arm, his fly leg, under the hammer. The police would never understand, but the professors would, and they must not. That had been Andre's last wish. I had to do it quickly. The night watchman must have heard the hammer and would be round at any moment. I pushed the other switch, and the hammer slowly lifted. Seeing but trying not to look, I ran forward and put the right arm under the hammer. Then I came back and pushed the first switch. The hammer came down a second time. Then I ran all the way home. You know the rest and can now do whatever you think right. So ended Helen's confession. The next day, I telephoned Commissaire Shara to invite him to dinner. He arrived at 8 o'clock that evening. You heard about my poor sister-in-law? I said. Yes, soon after you telephoned me this morning, he said. I am sorry, but perhaps it was for the best. I suppose she killed herself. Without a doubt, he said. We found more of the fatal drug sewn into her dress. I would like to show you a very strange document after dinner, Carras, I said. Ah, yes, I heard that Madame Delambre had been writing a lot, but we could find nothing but the short note informing us that she was taking her own life. During our dinner, we talked about politics, books, films, and the local football club. After dinner, I took him up to my study where was a warm fire to sit by. I would like you to read this, Charas, I said. First, because it was partly intended for you, and secondly, because it will interest you. I would like to burn it afterwards. Without a word, he took the sheets of paper Helene had given me and started to read. 20 minutes later, he carefully folded them and put them into the brown envelope. Then he put the envelope into the fire. When it was burning, he said, I think it proves beyond all doubt that Madame Delambre was quite insane. For a long time, we watched the fire eating up Helene's confession. A strange thing happened to me this morning, Charas. I went the cemetery where my brother's body is buried. It was quite empty, and I was alone. Not quite, Monsieur Delambre, he said. I was there, but I didn't want to disturb you. Then you saw me. Yes, I saw you bury a small box. Do you know what was in it? A fly, I suppose, he said. Yes. I had found it early this morning, caught in a spider's web in the garden. Was it dead? He asked. No, not quite. I killed it between two stones. Its head was white, all white.